Hey there, so this is a mega collaboration that we've been working on with 4 other channels, and it's all about the CIA. So first up over here, you've got This Is Genius, looking at the CIA's 5 bizarrest operations of all time. Then you've got All Time Conspiracies and their take on allegations that the CIA created AIDS. Then you've got Dark 5 and the 5 darkest experiments of MK Ultra. And finally, last but not least, you've got All Time Numbers doing the CIA in numbers. But here is our take on the 5 worst CIA operations of all time. So let's begin with the Phoenix program. The CIA's website says that this is one of the most misunderstood programs undertaken during the Vietnam War. They say it's treated with suspicion because of the way the press, the anti-war movement and scholars portrayed it. You make up your own minds. On the face of it, Phoenix was a program to pacify support for the Viet Cong and build it for the South and US forces. But even the CIA's description makes it sound pretty brutal.
From our present location, we've found another possible pickup zone, over.
Lists of people believed to be VC members or collaborators were created by 100 provincial intelligence committees, and then they were sent to CIA paramilitary groups, police or military forces, including Navy SEALs and the US Army. The Phoenix Field Forces were then sent out to the villages. They picked out the people they were looking for and, in the CIA's own words, remember, neutralized them. Neutralizing them involved arresting them, capturing them for interrogation, or, if they just resisted a little bit, they were killed. It's thought that Phoenix could have eliminated as many as 80,000 people through defection, detention, and death. But why would we just take what the CIA says about it? Let's look at what some of the critics say. Douglas Valentine, who's a historian, says the program targeted civilians, not soldiers, and that they could be kidnapped, tortured, and detained for 2 years without trial, or even murdered. He says there was no due process and it was open to corruption. And he quotes one CIA officer as describing Phoenix as a very good blackmail scheme, saying, "If you don't do what I want, you're VC." Then there's the former soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Herbert wrote in his autobiography that they wanted me to take charge of execution teams that wiped out entire families and tried to make it look as though the VC themselves had done the killing. And then Bart Osborne testified before Congress in 1971, telling them that Phoenix was a sterile, depersonalized murder program. Phoenix was shut down in 1971. And that leads us on to Operation Chaos. Seymour Hersh was the investigative journalist responsible for bringing chaos to the public. He wrote an article in the New York Times revealing the large-scale intelligence operation against the anti-war movement and various dissident groups within the US. The activities targeted as many as 10,000 Americans and involved break-ins, wiretaps, inspection of mail and dozens of illegal activities. Agents were also allowed to follow and photograph people in the anti-war movement.
I got a Silver Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal, 8 Air Medals, National Defense, and the rest of this garbage. It doesn't mean a thing.
Now, at the time, the CIA argued that the operation was operating in the context of foreign counterintelligence, as in they believed that foreign powers had influence over the anti-war movement. But the thing is, chaos directly contravened the CIA's charter agreed in 1947, which forbade the agency from having police, subpoena, law enforcement powers or internal security functions inside the US. In one of their own retrospective histories, which represent their own side of events, the CIA admits that without Hersh's article, it's very unlikely there would ever have been a Rockefeller Commission, a Pike Report, or a Church Commission. There are links to those in the video description if you want to find out more about them. Next up is PB Success. Guatemala's President Arbenz was democratically elected in 1951, and he made it his mission to implement agrarian and land reforms. One of the biggest landowners in Guatemala at the time was the US multinational corporation, United Fruit. With US interests in danger, the CIA, with the help of Edward Bernays, set about a massive PR and propaganda campaign in Guatemala and at home, trying to paint Arbenz as a dangerous communist, which he was not. To do this, the CIA was able to utilize another of its programs, Operation Mockingbird. Mockingbird was an international network of journalists in the CIA's pocket. Through that network, the agency was able to distribute and disseminate its propaganda, and gradually the world began to accept the image of Arbenz as a communist. He was not. The CIA also engineered and backed a coup led by Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas in 1954. The colonel and subsequent dictators led successive brutal regimes that disappeared or killed thousands of citizens and led to decades of instability, political conflict and civil war. The conflict didn't end until 1996, and some people put the estimates of people disappeared or murdered as high as 200,000. Project MKUltra ran from 1953 to 1964 and involved dozens of experiments on US citizens without their knowledge, using chemical and biological agents. It was an experiment that sought to control minds and beings. Just some of the stated objectives were to discover materials and methods that would increase the ease and usefulness of hypnosis, enhance the ability of individuals to withstand torture, coercion and brainwashing, produce total amnesia for events surrounding their use, and produce physical disablement such as paralysis of the legs. And those were just some of the frankly evil objectives. The most infamous of materials used was probably LSD. That was administered to people without their knowledge. The experiments led to long-term health effects, including paranoid schizophrenia and in some cases death, which is just about the most long-term of all long-term health effects. There were a total of 149 sub-projects focusing on modifying behavior, but as Senator Teddy Kennedy noted, the CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all records to be destroyed. Now, MKUltra was evil, but what about Operation Northwoods? Admittedly, it never actually came to fruition, but the very fact that somebody could even come up with these ideas is terrifying. And it very nearly was implemented. It was only Defense Secretary Robert McNamara and President John F. Kennedy who put a stop to it. The plan was to create the impression that the US was under attack from Cuba, using a variety of methods to present the Cuban government as an aggressive, rash and irresponsible threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere. The now unclassified documents say that the ultimate objective was overt military action against Cuba. The first part of the plan was to harass, prod and provoke Cuba into a reaction, giving the US a legitimate reason to send in the military. They do that with a number of small-scale staged incidents, with friendly Cubans acting as saboteurs, starting fires and inciting riots around the US base at Guantanamo Bay. There were plans to blow up a US ship in Guantanamo Bay, or better, near Havana. There were also plans for a Cuban communist terror campaign in Miami and other cities in Florida, perhaps even extending it as far away as Washington, D.C. And it goes even further. There were plans to sink a boatload of Cubans, to set off plastic bombs in Cuban areas, stage Cuban Air Force attacks on US planes, but perhaps most dastardly of all would be a staged attack on a US aircraft carrying US civilians. There was a convoluted plan to swap over planes, which meant that they wouldn't actually shoot down a plane load of civilians, but nobody in the international community would have had the faintest idea. So that was our top 5. You may well disagree with some of them. Why not suggest some more in the comments below? God knows there are plenty of them to go through. And we will see you again next time.